The gunshot that killed Vincent Yates's wife echoed through his memory every time he closed his eyes, though he had not been there to hear it, and that made it somehow worse. He stood at the bar in Camp Verde, Arizona, nursing a whiskey he did not really want on a sweltering afternoon in June of 1878. The desert heat pressed against the saloon's wooden walls like something alive and vengeful. Vincent had drifted into this territorial town 3 days ago with nothing but his horse, his gun, and a hollowness in his chest that seemed to grow wider with each passing month. 2 years had passed since cholera had swept through his small ranch outside Tucson, taking his mother first, then his father within days, and finally his younger sister Margaret, who had fought so hard to survive that watching her fade, had broken something fundamental inside him. He had been 23 then, certain he could rebuild, certain the land and hard work would heal him. He had been wrong. The saloon doors swung open, and Vincent glanced up out of habit more than interest. A woman stepped inside, and the immediate hush that fell over the room made his shoulders tense. Women did not typically walk into saloons alone, not in Camp Verde, not anywhere in the Arizona territory. She was young, perhaps 21 or 22, with dark hair pulled back in a braid that had come loose in places, and her dress was covered in dust from travel. But it was her eyes that caught Vincent's attention. They held the same emptiness he saw in his own reflection every morning, that particular brand of grief that came from losing everything that mattered. "I need work," she said, her voice steady despite the stares. "Any kind of work. I can cook, clean, mend clothes, help with accounts." "I am good with numbers." The bartender, a thick-necked man named Morris, shook his head slowly. "Miss, this is not the place to be asking for respectable work. I have asked everywhere else." Her jaw tightened. "I have been asking for 3 days." Vincent found himself speaking before he fully decided to. "The boarding house on the East End needs help. Mrs. Patterson mentioned it yesterday." Every head in the saloon turned toward him. The woman's gaze locked onto his, and he saw a flicker of something that might have been hope or might have been desperation. They were often the same thing out here. "Thank you," she said quietly. Then she turned and walked back out into the brutal sunlight. Vincent set down his whiskey and followed her, ignoring the low murmurs that started up behind him. Outside, the heat hit like a physical blow. The woman had paused on the wooden sidewalk, one hand raised to shield her eyes as she scanned the street. "East End," Vincent said, pointing. "The white building with the green shutters. You cannot miss it." She studied him for a long moment, and he had the uncomfortable sensation of being measured and assessed. "Why did you help me?" "Because someone should have helped you 3 days ago, and they did not." "That is not much of an answer." Vincent almost smiled, though it did not quite reach his face. "It is the only one I have." She nodded slowly, then extended her hand in a gesture that was oddly formal given the circumstances. "Amelia Zimmerman." He shook her hand, noting the calluses on her palm, the strength in her grip. "Vincent Yates." "Will you walk with me, Vincent Yates? I find that recommendations carry more weight when the recommender is present." He should have said no. He should have tipped his hat and walked away and returned to the quiet, numb existence he had been cultivating for the past 2 years. Instead, he said, "Yes." They walked in silence through the dusty streets of Camp Verde. The town was small but growing, fueled by the nearby military post and the cattle ranches that sprawled across the surrounding territory. Vincent had taken work as a ranch hand when he first arrived, but he found he could not stay in one place long. The memories followed him regardless of geography. Mrs. Patterson was a round woman in her 50s with shrewd eyes and a no-nonsense manner. She looked Amelia up and down when they arrived at the boarding house, then transferred her gaze to Vincent. "You vouch for this girl." Vincent hesitated. He knew nothing about Amelia Zimmerman except that she needed work and carried grief like a second skin. But he said, "I do." "Can you cook for 20 people?" "Yes, madam," Amelia said. "Can you do laundry without ruining good shirts?" "Yes, madam." "Can you keep your head when rough men get rowdy?" Amelia's expression did not change, but something hardened in her eyes. "I have survived worse than rowdy men, Mrs. Patterson." The older woman's gaze sharpened with interest. "I imagine you have. Room and board plus $2 a week. You start at dawn, finish when the work is done. Sundays you get the afternoon off. Acceptable? More than acceptable, thank you. Do not thank me yet. You have not seen how much laundry 20 men can generate." Mrs. Patterson turned to Vincent. "You staying for supper? I am making pot roast." He had not planned to, but he found himself nodding. "Yes, madam." The boarding-house dining room was long and narrow, with 2 tables that seated 10 each. Vincent took a seat near the end while Amelia disappeared into the kitchen with Mrs. Patterson. The other boarders filtered in as the sun began its descent toward the horizon. They were a mix of ranch hands, prospectors, a telegraph operator, and a sardonic gambler named Charlie, who immediately tried to get Vincent into a card game. "Not tonight," Vincent said. "You have been saying that since you arrived, and I will keep saying it." When Amelia emerged from the kitchen carrying a large pot of stew, every conversation in the room stuttered to a halt. Mrs. Patterson followed with a basket of bread, looking grimly satisfied by the reaction. "This is Amelia. She will be helping me here. Anyone who bothers her will find themselves looking for new lodging. Are we clear?" A chorus of "Yes, madam" echoed through the room. The stew was good, rich and thick with vegetables and chunks of beef. Vincent ate mechanically, barely tasting it, but he noticed that Amelia moved through the room with practiced efficiency, refilling cups and clearing plates with the ease of someone who had done this work before. When she finally sat down to eat her own meal, she chose a seat at the far end of the other table, away from the men but with a clear view of the door. Another survival instinct. After supper, Vincent helped carry dishes to the kitchen even though Mrs. Patterson protested. Amelia was already pumping water into a large basin, her sleeves rolled up to her elbows. "You do not have to do that," she said when she saw him setting plates on the counter. "I know." She turned back to the water, and for a moment they worked in companionable silence. Then she said, "Why are you in Camp Verde, Vincent Yates, passing through? Why are you?" "I was heading to California. I ran out of money." "California is a long way from here. Where did you start?" Her hands stilled in the water. "New Mexico Territory, a small settlement near the border." "You would not have heard of it." He recognized the careful omission, the way she redirected without quite lying. He had become an expert at the same technique. "What happened?" "I said you would not have heard of it." "That is not what I meant." Amelia turned to face him, water dripping from her hands. In the lamplight, he could see the fine lines of exhaustion around her eyes, the tightness in her jaw that suggested she was holding herself together through sheer will. "Apache raid. 6 months ago. They killed everyone. My parents, my 2 brothers, the neighbors. Everyone except me and my younger sister. We hid in a root cellar." The words came out flat, emotionless, as though she had told the story so many times it had lost all meaning. Vincent understood that too. "Where is your sister now?" "Fever took her in Socorro, 2 months after the raid." Amelia's voice cracked slightly on the last word and she turned back to the dishes. "I am sorry. You did not ask to hear this." "My family died of cholera," Vincent heard himself say. 2 years ago. Mother, father, my sister Margaret. I watched them go one by one and could not do a single thing to stop it." Amelia's hands stilled again. When she spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. "How do you bear it?" I do not know that I do. I just keep moving. She nodded slowly, and something passed between them in that moment, a recognition that needed no words. They were both ghosts haunting their own lives, searching for something they could not name. Vincent stayed at the boarding house that night, paying Mrs. Patterson for a room even though he had been sleeping in the stable loft where he worked. He told himself it was because the bed would be more comfortable, but he knew it was because he did not want to leave Amelia alone in a house full of strangers, even with Mrs. Patterson's protection. The next morning he found her in the kitchen before dawn, already kneading dough for breakfast biscuits. Her hair was in a fresh braid, and she had changed into a different dress, though it was just as worn as the previous one. "You are up early," she said. "Habit. Ranch work starts before sunrise." He poured himself coffee from the pot she had already brewed. "How was your first night?" "Quiet. Mrs. Patterson snores louder than you would think possible." There was the faintest hint of humor in her voice, and it transformed her face for a moment, making her look younger and less haunted. Vincent found himself smiling in return. "I will keep that in mind if I ever take the room next to hers." They fell into an easy rhythm over the following weeks. Vincent discovered reasons to be at the boarding house more often than strictly necessary. He fixed a broken window frame, replaced some rotted boards on the porch, helped Mrs. Patterson move heavy furniture. Amelia would bring him water or coffee, and they would talk in stolen moments between her endless tasks. He learned that she had been planning to be a schoolteacher before the raid, that she loved mathematics and could calculate figures in her head faster than most people could with paper and pencil. She learned that he had once wanted to expand his family's ranch, that he had a gift for working with horses, that he played the harmonica though he had not touched his in over a year. "Why did you stop?" she asked one evening. They were sitting on the boarding house porch after supper, watching the sun set over the distant mountains. It had become their routine when Vincent was in town. "It reminded me too much of before. My sister loved it when I played." Amelia was quiet for a moment. "My mother used to sing old ballads from back east. I have not been able to listen to music since she died. It feels like betrayal somehow." "Betrayal of what?" "Of her memory. Like if I enjoy something she loved, I am saying her death does not matter." Vincent turned to look at her. The fading sunlight caught the copper highlights in her dark hair, and he noticed for the first time that she had a small scar above her left eyebrow. "I think she would want you to enjoy it. I think she would want you to live." "Would your sister want you to play again?" The question hit him squarely in the chest. He thought of Margaret, barely 16, making him promise as she lay dying that he would not stop living just because she had to. He had made that promise and then broken it every day since. Yes, she would. Then perhaps we are both failing them by holding on so tightly to grief. He did not have an answer for that, so they sat in silence and watched the sky turn from gold to pink to deep purple. When the first stars appeared, Amelia stood and brushed off her skirt. "I should help Mrs. Patterson with the dishes." "Amelia." He stood as well, and she paused, looking up at him with those dark, knowing eyes. "I am glad you came to Camp Verde." Her expression softened. "I am glad too, Vincent Yates." Summer deepened into the brutal heat of July and August. Vincent took a permanent position at the boarding house, doing repairs and maintenance in exchange for room and board plus a small wage. It made more sense than drifting between ranches, he told himself. It had nothing to do with wanting to see Amelia every day, to hear her voice, to watch her slowly come back to life in small increments. But he knew he was lying to himself. She had begun to smile more often, and sometimes he even heard her laugh at something Mrs. Patterson said. She had gained a little weight, filling out the hollows in her cheeks, and the shadows under her eyes had faded. He wanted to believe he had something to do with that, though he was not arrogant enough to take full credit. One Sunday afternoon in late August, Vincent finally retrieved his harmonica from the bottom of his saddlebag. He found Amelia in the small garden behind the boarding house, pulling weeds in the vegetable patch Mrs. Patterson maintained. She looked up when she heard his footsteps, wiping sweat from her forehead with the back of her hand. "Finished with the roof repair?" she asked. "For now. I will need to replace more shingles before winter, but it will hold." He sat down on the bench near the garden fence, and after a moment's hesitation, he raised the harmonica to his lips. The first notes came out rusty and uncertain, but muscle memory took over quickly. He played one of the songs Margaret had loved, a gentle melody that had always reminded him of rain. When he finished, he lowered the harmonica and found Amelia standing perfectly still, her hands full of weeds, tears streaming down her face. "I am sorry," he said immediately, standing. "I should not have, no." She shook her head, setting down the weeds. "It was beautiful. I had forgotten what it felt like to hear music without wanting to die." He crossed to her without thinking, and she stepped into his arms as naturally as breathing. She was small against his chest, and he could feel her shaking as she cried. He held her carefully, aware that this was the first time they had touched beyond the occasional brush of hands, and something in his chest that had been locked tight for 2 years began to crack open. "I miss them so much," she whispered against his shirt. "I know. I miss mine too." They stood like that until her tears subsided, and when she finally pulled back, she did not apologize or look embarrassed. She simply looked at him with red-rimmed eyes and said, "Will you play another?" So he did. He played every song he could remember while she went back to her weeding, and the afternoon slipped away in music and sunlight and the feeling that maybe, just maybe, they were both learning how to be alive again. That night, after the boarders had gone to their rooms and Mrs. Patterson had retired with a pointed look that suggested she knew exactly what was developing under her roof, Vincent and Amelia found themselves alone in the parlor. She was mending a shirt, and he was reading a week-old newspaper, but neither of them was paying much attention to their tasks. "Vincent," she said suddenly, "do you ever think about the future?" He set down the newspaper. "Sometimes, not as much as I probably should. I have been thinking about it more lately." She kept her eyes on her mending. "About what I want, about what is possible, and what do you want?" She finally looked up at him, and the vulnerability in her expression made his heart clench. "I want to stop feeling like a ghost. I want to build something that matters. I want—" She hesitated, then continued softly, "I want to feel alive again." Vincent crossed the room and sat beside her on the settee. "I want those things too. Do you think we can have them, after everything we have lost?" He took the mending from her hands and set it aside, then covered her hand with his. "I think if we do not try, we will regret it for the rest of our lives." Amelia turned her hand over, lacing her fingers through his. "I am afraid," she admitted. "Every time I start to feel happy, I think about my family and wonder if I have the right to move forward when they cannot." "They cannot move forward," Vincent said quietly, "but we can. And maybe the best way to honor them is to live the lives they would want for us." She leaned her head against his shoulder, and he wrapped his arm around her, pulling her close. They sat like that for a long time, not speaking, just being together in the lamplight while the clock on the mantel ticked away the minutes. When Amelia finally went up to her room, Vincent lay awake in his own bed, thinking about futures and possibilities and the way her hand had felt in his. September brought cooler temperatures and a sense of change in the air. Vincent realized with some surprise that he had been in Camp Verde for nearly 4 months, the longest he had stayed anywhere since his family died. The reason was sitting across from him at the kitchen table, helping Mrs. Patterson planned the week's meals while sunlight streamed through the window and caught in her hair. He was in love with her. The realization did not come as a shock so much as a quiet certainty, the acknowledgement of something that had been building for weeks. He loved the way she laughed, the way she approached every task with determination, the way she listened when he talked about his family without trying to fix his grief or tell him to move on. He loved her strength and her vulnerability, her intelligence and her kindness. He loved her, and the thought terrified him because he had already lost everyone he had ever loved, and he did not know if he could survive losing her too. But the alternative was walking away, and he knew with equal certainty that he would not do that. Could not do that. Whatever time they had, whether it was days or decades, he would take it. That evening he asked her to go for a walk. Camp Verde was quiet as they made their way through the streets, past the shuttered shops and the saloon where he had first met her. They walked to the edge of town where the desert opened up before them, vast and star-filled and ancient. "Amelia," he said, and his voice came out rougher than intended. "I need to tell you something." She turned to face him, her expression cautious. "All right, I am in love with you." The words hung in the air between them, simple and terrifying. "I did not plan to be. I did not think I could be after everything. But I am, and you deserve to know." For a long moment she did not speak, and Vincent felt his heart hammering against his ribs. Then she stepped forward and took both his hands in hers. "I am in love with you too," she said, and her voice shook slightly. "I have been for weeks. I was just too afraid to say it." Relief and joy flooded through him in equal measure. He pulled her close and kissed her, and it felt like coming home and setting out on an adventure all at once. She kissed him back with a fierceness that spoke of all the loss and loneliness they had both endured, and when they finally broke apart, they were both breathless. "What do we do now?" she asked, her forehead resting against his. "We figure it out together. We build something new." "I would like that. I would like that very much." They walked back to the boarding house hand in hand, and when they told Mrs. Patterson the next morning, the older woman's only response was, "About time. I was beginning to think you were both blind." The engagement was short because neither of them saw the point in waiting. They had both lost enough time to grief and fear. The wedding took place in late October in the small church at the center of Camp Verde, with Mrs. Patterson and the boarding house residents in attendance along with a handful of townspeople who had come to know them over the months. Amelia wore a simple blue dress that Mrs. Patterson had helped her make, and Vincent wore his best shirt and the suit jacket he had not touched since his father's funeral. When the preacher pronounced them husband and wife, Vincent kissed her and felt the last of the ice around his heart finally melt away. They spent their wedding night in a hotel in Prescott, a larger town about 30 miles south. Vincent had saved every spare dollar for months to make it special, and the room he had reserved was the finest in the establishment, with a real bed and curtains and even a private bath. Amelia stood at the window, looking out at the moonlit street below, and when Vincent came up behind her and wrapped his arms around her waist, she leaned back against him with a sigh of contentment. "I never thought I would feel this way again," she said softly. "Safe. Happy. Like the future is something to look forward to instead of something to dread." "Neither did I." He pressed a kiss to her temple. "But I am grateful beyond words that we found each other." She turned in his arms, and the love in her eyes took his breath away. "So am I." They made love slowly and tenderly, learning each other with patience and care. Afterward, they lay tangled together in the darkness, and Vincent traced idle patterns on her bare shoulder while she drifted towards sleep. "Vincent," she murmured drowsily. "Yes, promise me we will live. Really live. Not just survive, but build something good." "I promise," he said, and he meant it with every fiber of his being. When they returned to Camp Verde, they moved into a small house Vincent had rented on the west side of town. It was nothing fancy, just 3 rooms and a kitchen, but it was theirs. Amelia continued working at the boarding house for a while, but as winter approached, Vincent's skill with horses led to an opportunity he had not expected. The owner of one of the largest ranches in the area, a man named Samuel Morrison, offered him a position as foreman with a substantial salary and a house on the ranch property. "It is a good offer," Amelia said when he told her. They were sitting at their small kitchen table and she had been kneading dough for bread. "But is it what you want?" Vincent considered the question carefully. "I think it might be. I loved ranching before everything fell apart. I would like to see if I can love it again. Then we should accept." "You are sure? You have only just settled here." She smiled and reached across to take his hand. "I am settled wherever you are, Vincent Yates. That is what marriage means." They moved to the Morrison Ranch in early December. The house that came with the position was significantly larger than their rental in town, with 4 rooms and a proper parlor. Amelia immediately began making it home, hanging curtains and arranging their modest collection of furniture. Vincent threw himself into the work with an enthusiasm that surprised him. He had not realized how much he had missed the rhythm of ranch life, the satisfaction of working with his hands, the challenges of managing cattle and horses, and the complex logistics of a large operation. Morrison was a fair boss, gruff but reasonable, and he seemed pleased with Vincent's work. More importantly, his wife Sarah took an immediate liking to Amelia and invited her to join the weekly sewing circle that several of the ranch wives attended. For the first time since the massacre, Amelia found herself part of a community, surrounded by women who accepted her without question. "I like it here," she told Vincent one evening as they sat together on their porch, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and red. "I feel like we are building the life we promised each other." He pulled her closer, and she rested her head on his shoulder. "We are, and it is only the beginning." Winter in Arizona was mild compared to what Vincent remembered from his childhood further north. But there were still cold nights when they huddled close under quilts and talked about their dreams for the future. Amelia wanted to start a school eventually, maybe in Camp Verde or on the ranch if there were enough children. Vincent wanted to save enough money to buy his own land someday, to build a ranch that would be a legacy for the family they hoped to have. Spring arrived with wildflowers and new calves, and Amelia told Vincent in late April that she was expecting a child. The news filled him with a joy so profound it was almost painful, but it was tinged with fear as well. He had lost so much already. The thought of losing her or the baby made him sick with terror. "Nothing is going to happen to me," she said firmly when she saw his expression. "Women have babies every day, Vincent. I am strong and healthy and we will be fine." "You cannot promise that." "No," she agreed. "But I can promise I will fight with everything I have to stay with you and our child." "Is that enough?" It had to be. He held her close and tried to breathe through the fear, reminding himself that he could not control the future any more than he had been able to control the cholera that took his family or the raiders that took hers. All he could do was love her fiercely and be present for every moment they had together. The pregnancy progressed smoothly through the summer. Amelia continued working in their home, though Sarah Morrison and the other ranch wives insisted she rest more than she wanted to. Vincent found himself constantly checking on her, bringing her water, making sure she was not overexerting herself. She tolerated his hovering with good humor, teasing him gently when he became too overbearing. In late November, on a cool evening when the first hints of winter were creeping into the air, Amelia went into labor. Vincent sent for the midwife and then paced the parlor like a caged animal while Sarah Morrison stayed with Amelia in the bedroom. The hours stretched into an eternity, and every cry of pain from behind that closed door felt like a knife to his heart. Finally, just before dawn, he heard a different sound. A baby's cry, thin and strong and utterly miraculous. Sarah opened the door moments later, smiling broadly. "You have a son," she said, "and your wife is tired but well." Vincent barely remembered crossing the room. Amelia was propped up on pillows, her hair damp with sweat, her face exhausted but radiant, and in her arms was a tiny, red-faced infant wrapped in a soft blanket. "Vincent," she said softly, "come meet your son." He sat carefully on the edge of the bed, and when she placed the baby in his arms, he was terrified he would break something so impossibly small and fragile. But the baby settled against his chest, and Vincent looked down into a scrunched-up face that already somehow resembled both him and Amelia, and felt his entire world shift on its axis. "He is perfect," he whispered. "He is," Amelia agreed. "What should we name him?" They had discussed names endlessly over the months, but now that the moment had arrived, Vincent knew exactly what felt right. "Thomas, after your father." Tears filled Amelia's eyes. "Are you certain?" "I am. They should be here to see this, your family and mine." "Since they cannot be, we will keep their memory alive through our children." "Thomas Vincent Yates," Amelia said, testing the name. "I love it." Vincent leaned over carefully and kissed her, the baby secure between them. "I love you, both of you, more than I have words to express." "I love you too. Thank you for finding me in that saloon. Thank you for giving me a reason to keep going. You did the same for me. We saved each other." Little Thomas proved to be a healthy, hungry baby who had inherited his mother's dark hair and his father's blue eyes. Vincent discovered that fatherhood suited him in ways he had not expected. He loved the weight of his son in his arms, the trust in those unfocused eyes, the way Thomas would grip his finger with surprising strength. Amelia was a natural mother, patient and loving even during the difficult nights when Thomas refused to sleep. As winter gave way to spring and then summer, they found their rhythm as a family. Vincent continued to excel in his position as foreman, and Morrison began talking about making him a partner in the ranch. Amelia started a small school in their parlor, teaching the children of the ranch hands basic reading and arithmetic twice a week. Thomas grew from a tiny infant into a chubby, curious baby who laughed at everything and tried to put everything in his mouth. On their second wedding anniversary, Vincent gave Amelia a beautiful wooden music box he had ordered from a craftsman in Prescott. When she opened the lid, it played one of the old ballads her mother used to sing. She cried, but they were good tears, healing tears. "I can listen to it now without breaking," she said, smiling through her tears. "Because I have you and Thomas, because I have a life worth living again." "We both do," Vincent agreed. 2 years later, they welcomed a daughter they named Margaret Sarah, after Vincent's sister and Sarah Morrison, who had become like a mother to Amelia. Thomas was a doting big brother, insisting on helping with everything even though he was barely 3. The house rang with laughter and occasional tears, and the beautiful chaos of family life. Morrison made good on his offer, and Vincent became a partner in the ranch. With his share of the profits, he began buying land adjacent to the Morrison property, slowly building toward his dream of his own ranch. Amelia's school had grown as well, and she now taught nearly 20 children in a small building Morrison had helped them construct near the main ranch house. One evening when Thomas was 5 and Margaret was 2, the family sat together on their porch watching the sunset. Thomas was showing his little sister how to whistle through a blade of grass, and Margaret was giggling even though she could not quite manage it yet. Amelia was sitting in the rocking chair Vincent had built her, and he was leaning against the porch railing, watching his family with a contentment that still sometimes took him by surprise. "You remember that day in the saloon?" Amelia asked suddenly. "When I walked in looking for work?" "Every detail," Vincent said. "You looked so determined, so desperate, so alone." "I was all of those things. I had almost given up." She looked at him with eyes full of love and gratitude. "And then you spoke up. You helped a stranger for no reason except that it was the right thing to do." "Best decision I ever made. Mine too. Choosing to walk into that saloon, choosing to accept your help, choosing to love you, all of it." She reached out her hand and he took it, their fingers interlacing with the ease of long practice. "We have built something beautiful, Vincent. Out of all that loss and pain, we created this." He looked at their children, at the home they had made, at the life they had fought so hard to claim. "We did, and I am grateful for every moment." Thomas abandoned his whistling lesson and came over to tug on Vincent's pant leg. "Papa, tell us the story about the horses again. You just heard it yesterday, but I like it. Please." Margaret toddled over as well, raising her arms to be picked up. Vincent scooped her onto his hip, while Thomas settled at his feet. And he began the story he had told 100 times about a particularly stubborn mare he had worked with when he first came to the ranch. Amelia watched them with a smile, and when Vincent caught her eye over the children's heads, the look they shared spoke of everything they had survived and overcome and built together. As the sun dipped below the horizon and the first stars appeared, Vincent finished his story. Thomas immediately demanded another, but Amelia intervened. "Bedtime," she announced, standing and holding out her hand to Thomas. "Say good night to Papa." After good-night hugs and kisses, Amelia took the children inside to get them ready for bed. Vincent stayed on the porch, breathing in the cool evening air and listening to the sounds of his family through the open window. Thomas was protesting that he was not tired while Margaret babbled happily about something only she understood. Amelia's voice was patient and firm, guiding them through the bedtime routine. This was what healing looked like, Vincent realized. Not forgetting the people they had lost or pretending the pain had never existed, but building something new that honored their memory. His parents and sister would have loved Amelia and the children. Her family would have been proud of the life she had created. The dead lived on in the choices the living made, in the love they shared, in the legacy they built. Later that night, after the children were asleep and he and Amelia had retreated to their own bed, she curled against him in the darkness. "I still think about them," she said quietly. "My parents and brothers, my sister, some days more than others. I think about mine too. I do not think that ever really goes away. No, but it hurts less now. Or maybe it hurts the same amount, but there is so much good in my life that it does not overwhelm me anymore." Vincent tightened his arms around her. "That is all we can ask for. To remember them and miss them, but to live fully despite the missing. We are doing that, are not we? Living fully. Yes, my love, we absolutely are." The years continued to unfold in a pattern of seasons and celebrations, challenges and triumphs. Vincent's land holdings grew steadily, and by the time Thomas was 10, they moved onto their own ranch adjacent to Morrison's property. The house Vincent built was large and welcoming, with enough bedrooms for the 2 additional children they welcomed, another daughter named Elizabeth, and a son they called James after Morrison, who had become a second father to Vincent. Amelia's school had become an institution in the area, and she taught 3 days a week with the help of a young assistant teacher from back east. She had a gift for making even the most reluctant students love learning, and several of her pupils had gone on to attend university, a rare achievement for ranch children. Thomas grew into a serious, thoughtful young man who loved the ranch work and showed every sign of inheriting his father's gift with horses. Margaret was spirited and clever, always into some kind of mischief. Elizabeth was the quiet one, happiest when she had a book in her hands. And James, the baby, was pure joy, finding delight in everything from mud puddles to wildflowers. On the 20th anniversary of that day in the Camp Verde saloon, Vincent and Amelia rode out to a spot on their land that overlooked the entire valley. It had become their private place over the years, somewhere they could escape when they needed time alone together. They spread a blanket and sat watching the play of light on the distant mountains. 20 years, Amelia mused. Sometimes it feels like a lifetime, and sometimes it feels like yesterday. Do you have any regrets? Vincent asked. She turned to look at him, and her eyes were clear and certain. Not a single one. Oh, I wish our families could have known this life we built. I wish Thomas could have met his namesake and Margaret could have known your sister. But the path we walked, the choices we made, they brought us here. And here is exactly where I want to be. Vincent took her hand and raised it to his lips. I love you, Amelia Yates. I have loved you since the day I watched you walk into that saloon demanding work. I will love you until the day I die and beyond if such things are possible. They are possible, she said softly, because I will love you just as long, Vincent Yates. You gave me back my life when I thought it was over. You gave me hope and home and a future worth living. That is a gift I can never adequately repay. You gave me the same. We saved each other. We did. And then we built something beautiful together. They sat in comfortable silence, hands entwined, watching the sun trace its eternal path across the Arizona sky. In the distance, they could see their house with smoke rising from the chimney where the children were probably helping the cook prepare supper. The cattle were dark specks on the hillsides, and the horses were grazing peacefully in the near pasture. This was their legacy. Not just the land and the buildings and the material success, but the family they had created, the community they had joined, the love they had fought so hard to keep. Out of unimaginable loss had come unimaginable gain. They had lost everything and found everything in the process of losing it. As the sun began to set, painting the sky in brilliant oranges and purples, Vincent pulled Amelia close and kissed her with all the passion and tenderness of 20 years of marriage. When they finally pulled apart, she was smiling. We should head back, she said. The children will be wondering where we are. Let them wonder a bit longer. I want to stay here with you just like this for a few more minutes. So they stayed, wrapped in each other's arms, watching the day fade into night. And when the first stars appeared, the same stars that had witnessed their wedding vows and the birth of their children and every joy and sorrow in between, they rose and rode home together, side by side, the way they had traveled through life for 2 decades and would continue to travel for all the years to come. Their children greeted them at the door, a tumble of voices demanding to know where they had been, and what they had been doing, and could they please eat now, because they were starving. Amelia laughed and shooed them toward the dining room while Vincent saw to the horses. When he came inside, his family was already seated around the large table he had built with his own hands, and the sight of them, healthy and happy in his, made his heart swell with gratitude. "Papa, you are late," James announced. "We had to wait forever." "It was 5 minutes," Elizabeth corrected. 5 minutes is forever when you are hungry," Thomas said, winking at his youngest brother. Margaret was already reaching for the bread basket, and Amelia gently redirected her hand. "Grace first," she reminded. They all bowed their heads, while Vincent said a simple prayer of thanks for the food, for the family, for the life they had been blessed to build together. When he finished, He looked around the table at each beloved face and added silently in his heart, "And thank you for bringing Amelia into that saloon 20 years ago. Thank you for giving us both a second chance at life." The meal was noisy and chaotic, with everyone talking over each other and arguing about whose turn it was to help with dishes and planning what they would do the next day. It was ordinary and perfect, the kind of evening that would blur together with hundreds of others in memory, but that in the moment felt precious beyond measure. After supper, after the children were in bed, after the house had quieted, Vincent and Amelia sat together in the parlor. He played his harmonica, the same instrument he had not been able to touch for so long, and she worked on a quilt, her needle flashing in the lamplight. The silence between them was comfortable and complete, the silence of two people who knew each other so well that words were often unnecessary. "Vincent," she said eventually, setting down her quilting, "do you think we have done right by them? Our families, I mean. Do you think they would be proud?" He lowered the harmonica and considered the question seriously. "I think they would be proud that we did not give up, that we found each other and built this life, that we chose to honor them by living fully rather than by drowning in grief. I hope you are right. I am. Because if our situations were reversed, if it was me who had died instead of my father, I would want him to find happiness again. I would want him to live and love and create a legacy. I am certain your family would want the same for you." Amelia nodded slowly, and he could see her accepting the truth of his words. "Then we have done well. We have done very well indeed." They sat together a while longer, and then made their way upstairs to the bedroom they shared. As Vincent lay in the darkness with Amelia breathing softly beside him, he thought about the long, winding path that had brought them to this moment, the sickness that had destroyed his world, the violence that had shattered hers, the desperate loneliness that had driven them both to the edge of giving up, and then the miracle of a chance meeting in a saloon, a simple act of kindness, a slow building of trust and friendship and love. They had found hope in each other when hope seemed impossible. They had found life in each other when they had both felt like walking ghosts. That was the real legacy, Vincent thought as sleep began to claim him. Not the ranch or the money or even the children, precious as they all were. The legacy was the proof that even after unimaginable loss, it was possible to build something good and true and lasting. That love could bloom in the ashes of grief. That two broken people could make each other whole. He reached out in the darkness and found Amelia's hand, and she squeezed his fingers in return, a silent acknowledgement that she was awake too, thinking similar thoughts perhaps. "Good night, my love," he whispered. "Good night, Vincent. Thank you for everything." "Thank you for walking into that saloon," she laughed softly. "Thank you for speaking up when you did not have to." "Always," he promised. "I will always speak up for you. I will always choose you. And I will always choose you." They drifted into sleep still holding hands, the way they had slept for 20 years, the way they would sleep for all the years remaining to them. Outside, the stars wheeled through their ancient patterns above the Arizona desert, and the wind whispered through the mesquite and sage, and the future stretched out before them full of possibility and promise. The boy who had lost his family to sickness and the girl who had lost hers to violence had found each other in the midst of their grief. They had found hope and healing, and a love that would endure through all the remaining days of their lives. They had found home in each other, and in doing so, they had discovered that the human heart is capable of remarkable resilience, that joy can coexist with sorrow, and that the best way to honor the dead is to live with courage and grace and an open heart. This was their story, and it was complete. Not because their lives were over, but because they had found what they were searching for. They had found peace, purpose, and most importantly, they had found each other. And in the wild, unforgiving landscape of the Arizona Territory in the late 19th century, that was no small miracle. It was everything